My late grandmother revealed the secret of the city, so I started to reveal it, and then my friend was kidnapped. My name is Eleanor Whitaker, and I never thought I'd return to Pine Hollow. It's a small, secluded town nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog clings to the trees like a shroud and secrets are buried deeper than the old coal mines. I left 20 years ago, vowing never to look back, but fate has a cruel sense of irony. The letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday, its parchment yellowed with age and the handwriting unmistakably that of my late grandmother, Beatrice Whitaker. She had passed away a decade prior, yet the letter bore a recent postmark. Inside, it simply read, "Eleanor, the time has come. Return to Pine Hollow. The truth awaits beneath the willow tree." I stared at the words, my hands trembling. The willow tree was a place of both comfort and dread from my childhood, a massive, ancient tree that stood behind my grandmother's house, its branches drooping like mourners at a funeral. It was where I'd spent countless hours reading, dreaming, and, on one fateful night, witnessing something that would haunt me forever. The drive to Pine Hollow was as I remembered, winding roads flanked by dense forests, the occasional deer darting across the path, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. As I approached the town, memories flooded back, some warm, like the scent of my grandmother's apple pie, and others cold and sharp, like the night I saw the shadows dancing beneath the willow tree. The town hadn't changed much. The same dilapidated buildings lined Main Street, their facades peeling and windows clouded with dust. The general store still bore the faded sign, Hollow Goods, EST 1892. The townsfolk, those few who remained, offered wary glances as I passed, their eyes filled with a mix of recognition and suspicion. Pulling up to my grandmother's house, I was struck by how time had taken its toll. The once vibrant garden was overgrown, the picket fence leaning precariously, and the paint on the porch chipped and faded. Yet, the house stood resilient, much like my grandmother had in life. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. Photographs lined the walls, capturing moments of joy and sorrow. I paused at one in particular, a picture of my grandmother and me beneath the willow tree, both smiling, unaware of the darkness that loomed. That night, sleep eluded me. The house creaked and groaned, settling into the silence of the night. I found myself drawn to the back porch, the moon casting a pale glow over the yard. The willow tree stood as it always had, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. But something was different. Approaching the tree, I noticed the ground beneath it disturbed, as if recently dug. Kneeling down, I brushed away the loose soil, revealing a small, ornate box. Inside, I found a collection of letters, photographs, and a journal, my grandmother's handwriting filling the pages. The journal detailed events I had long suppressed, whispers in the night, shadows that moved against the natural order, and a secret society that had operated in Pine Hollow for generations. My grandmother had been part of it, but she had turned against them, seeking to protect me from their influence. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. The final entry read, "They know I've told you. They will come. Be strong, Eleanor. Uncover the truth and bring justice to Pine Hollow." Determined to honor my grandmother's wishes, I began to investigate the town's history. Visiting the local library, I combed through old newspapers, town records, and any documents I could find. Patterns emerged: disappearances, unexplained deaths, and a recurring symbol, a circle with a line through it, often found near the scenes of these tragedies. I reached out to the town's historian, Mr. Harold Granger, a man in his 70s with a sharp mind and a guarded demeanor. At first, he was reluctant to speak, but upon learning of my grandmother's involvement, he agreed to meet. Over tea in his cluttered study, he revealed the existence of the Order of the Veil, a secret society that had wielded power in Pine Hollow for over a century. They believed in harnessing the energy of the land, performing rituals beneath the willow tree to maintain their control. My grandmother had been their high priestess until she broke away, fearing the darkness they embraced. Mr. Granger warned me to be cautious, as members of the order still held positions of influence in the town. He handed me a list of names, some familiar, others shocking. Among them was Sheriff Thomas Caldwell, a man I had trusted in my youth. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I couldn't confront the order alone. I reached out to Daniel Harper, a childhood friend who had become an investigative journalist. Skeptical at first, he agreed to help after reviewing the evidence I had gathered. Together, we devised a plan to expose the order's activities. We would gather testimonies, document rituals, and shine a light on the darkness that had plagued Pine Hollow for generations. But as we delved deeper, the shadows grew restless, and the true horror of what lay beneath the willow tree began to surface. I hadn't spoken to Daniel Harper in years, but the moment he picked up the phone and heard my voice, there was silence, a heavy one. The kind that thickens with memories not yet spoken. "Eleanor," he asked cautiously. I told him I was back in Pine Hollow and needed his help. I didn't mention the order. Not yet. Daniel arrived 2 days later, his beat-up Chevy spitting gravel in front of my grandmother's house. He hadn't changed much, still lean, still intense, still scanning the world as though every corner held a secret waiting to be exposed. He stepped onto the porch, looked around, then gave me a hug that lingered a second too long. We sat inside with cups of coffee, the house eerily quiet. I handed him my grandmother's journal and the file I'd assembled from the library and Mr. Granger. He read without speaking, flipping pages slowly, his face a portrait of disbelief that hardened into concern. This is organized crime," he finally said. "Not rituals. Not mysticism. A network. Quiet, powerful. They've controlled this town for decades." His voice dropped. "You know what this means, right? If any of this is real, people will kill to keep it hidden." And I believed him. Because what I had wasn't just rumor or small-town paranoia. These were ledgers, personal letters, photographs, real evidence of exploitation and control. From land thefts in the 60s to blackmailing local officials, the so-called Order of the Veil had simply been a front, a smokescreen to cover a powerful syndicate operating in secret, hiding behind folklore. We made a pact that night. We wouldn't go to the police. Sheriff Caldwell's name was on the list. We would dig, document, and publish. Carefully. Anonymously if we had to. Daniel still had contacts from his days working for the Knoxville Chronicle. He said if we built a case, they'd run it. Even if it meant naming names. We began quietly. Our first step was to verify one of the oldest claims, the disappearance of a teenage girl named Sylvia Dobbins in 1978. Her name had appeared in my grandmother's journal, listed alongside others who had vanished after crossing someone in the order. The police had written her off as a runaway. No investigation. No press. Her mother, Martha Dobbins, still lived in town. Getting her to talk wasn't easy. She eyed us suspiciously at first, her knuckles whitening around her cup of tea. But when I showed her my grandmother's handwriting, something shifted. Her hands trembled. "She tried to help me," Martha whispered. "Beatrice. She believed me when no one else would." Her voice cracked. "They made me believe I was crazy. Martha told us everything. Sylvia had gone to the sheriff's office the day before she vanished. She was scared, said someone had been following her after she wrote a letter about what she'd seen behind the lumber mill. The next morning, her bed was empty, her bike found by the river. Sheriff Caldwell filed a report, closed it in less than 24 hours. We asked if she still had the letter. She laughed, bitter and hollow. "They took everything. But I remember what it said." She saw them. Late at night. Moving boxes from the mill to unmarked trucks. She thought it was drugs. Or worse. We left with Martha's reluctant blessing. Daniel took detailed notes. That night, we sat under the willow tree in the backyard, reviewing what we had. "They're not a cult," Daniel said. "They're a pipeline. They use the town's isolation. The order is just branding. The truth is more terrifying, it's corruption. Organized, sustained, systemic corruption. And no one's ever dared to pull the curtain back." We decided to infiltrate the mill. It was abandoned now officially. The Whitaker Lumber Company had shut down 10 years ago after a fire. But according to town records, it was still owned by an LLC based out of Charleston. And just last month, there had been an energy bill registered their active utilities. That night, we slipped in through the back fence, flashlights off, moving in the dark. The building groaned with age, the scent of mildew and oil thick in the air. But inside, it wasn't empty. There were signs of recent use, cleared pathways, fresh footprints, crates stacked with care. The offices had files, invoices, and shipping logs. Names. Dates. Destinations. We took photos of everything. It felt too easy. That's when we heard the click behind us. A voice, a woman's, calm, measured. "You shouldn't be here." She stepped into the light. Mid-40s. Gray hair pulled back tight. She wore a sheriff's badge. But not Caldwell's. Her name tag read Deputy Emma Richter. She looked at us inside. "You think you're the first ones to try and uncover this?" she asked. "Your grandmother tried. Others too. But the people you're after, they don't care about justice. They care about silence. Daniel stepped forward. Are you part of this? She didn't answer directly. I've seen enough to know the game. If you're smart, you'll walk away. Burn your notes. Leave this place behind. Then she turned and left. Just like that. No threat. No handcuffs. Just a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Neither could Daniel. We laid everything out on the dining room table: names, places, missing persons, financial records. A picture was forming. A dark, undeniable picture. The order wasn't just a local secret. It was a criminal empire rooted in fear, protected by those sworn to uphold the law. I looked at Daniel. Do we stop? He didn't hesitate. No. We publish. We sent everything we had to his old editor at the Chronicle, encrypted and anonymous. It would take time. It had to be vetted, corroborated. But the wheels were in motion. And that's when the calls started. Blocked numbers. Silence on the other end. Then, one night, a voice: "You're making a mistake." The message was clear. Back off. Or disappear. But I wasn't the girl who left Pine Hollow anymore. I was a woman who had seen injustice claw into the bones of a community and refused to look away. My grandmother had given her life trying to expose it. I wouldn't let that be in vain. The days after we sent the files were some of the longest of my life. Daniel had booked a room at a motel on the edge of town, too nervous to stay at the house. I stayed alone, curtains drawn, the shotgun my grandmother had kept in the basement now cleaned and within reach. We were expecting retaliation. We got silence. But it wasn't the kind that gave you peace. The local paper ran a story 2 days later, just a puff piece about renewed interest in Pine Hollow's forgotten history. Nothing revealing. But the byline? A young reporter named Julia Lynn. She had gone to school with Daniel and reached out after seeing his name pop up on old public records. She wanted to help. She believed in what we were doing. That same night, someone broke into Daniel's motel room. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. Just rearranged. The suitcase zipped closed when he always left it open. A single cup moved half an inch to the left. It was a message. We can reach you. Daniel called me in a panic. I told him to come back to the house. He did. We slept in shifts after that. Julia worked fast. She knew people in the state attorney's office, and more importantly, she knew how to navigate official channels without raising suspicion. She took our files and added to them, pulling property deeds, hidden LLC connections, campaign contributions that traced back to shell companies based in Delaware. A name kept appearing: Gregory Penwell. He had never lived in Pine Hollow, but his name was tied to everything. He owned the mill now. He'd donated thousands to local political campaigns. He even once paid for the high school's new gym. Penwell, we learned, had made his fortune in construction. But his rise coincided exactly with the years Pine Hollow fell under the control of the order. The deeper we went, the more apparent it became: Pine Hollow was just one piece in a sprawling, perfectly legal-looking operation. Land laundering, labor exploitation, political manipulation. And behind it all, smiling faces at charity galas and town fairs. We documented everything. And then we went quiet. The silence didn't last. Julia disappeared first. She didn't answer calls. Her apartment was locked from the inside. Her car in the lot. No signs of struggle. The police said she likely took a break. A break when she just told us she was days away from sending the entire dossier to a national outlet. We knew what had happened. We just couldn't prove it. Daniel was devastated. He blamed himself. I tried to keep him focused. We have the files, I reminded him. We go wider. We go national. He nodded, but he was different now. Shaken. Sleep deprived. Paranoid. And then came the envelope. No return address. Inside, a single photo. Julia. Tied to a chair. Eyes swollen. A bruise on her jaw. There was no note. Just a number written on the back: 48. 48 hours. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about exposure anymore. This was about rescue. Julia wasn't just a casualty. She was leverage. And we couldn't just sit back and wait. Daniel wanted to go to the FBI. But I knew better. Not yet. We couldn't risk tipping off the wrong person. Instead, we called Harold Granger. He answered on the first ring. When I explained what had happened, there was a long pause, and then, meet me at the old train depot. Midnight. Come alone. We did as he asked. The depot was abandoned, its skeletal structure lit only by the high beams of our car. Granger emerged from the shadows, carrying a thick manila folder. I'd been preparing for this, he said. Your grandmother, she wasn't just gathering stories. She was collecting insurance. She gave me copies of everything she had. He handed over the folder. Inside were statements. Names. Maps. One showed a network of underground storage units beneath the town, remnants of old mining tunnels and Prohibition-era hideouts. She suspected they were using the tunnels, Granger said. Moving people. Goods. Secrets. Daniel and I looked at each other. Julia was down there. She had to be. We planned carefully. We found an old access point near the edge of town, behind a crumbling barn no one had touched in years. Granger stayed behind to monitor police chatter on an old shortwave radio. Daniel and I went in, armed with flashlights, a camera, and nothing more than desperation. The tunnels were damp, claustrophobic. The walls whispered with ancient echoes. But this wasn't folklore. This was infrastructure, corridors carved for smuggling, reinforced in modern times. We moved for nearly an hour before we heard it, the faint echo of a voice. Muffled. Weak. We followed it. There, in a crude room made of cinder blocks, we found her. Julia. Barely conscious. Tied, bruised, but alive. We carried her out. No guards. No alarms. Just silence. They never expected anyone to find her. We didn't waste time. Julia was hospitalized under an alias. She recovered slowly, whispering names between nightmares. We handed everything to a federal prosecutor Daniel trusted, someone who'd been following the trail from another angle. The evidence was overwhelming. Within weeks, it began. Arrests. Indictments. A federal task force descended on Pine Hollow, uncovering a criminal network that stretched across 3 states. Sheriff Caldwell was among the first to be arrested. Gregory Penwell was dragged out of his mansion in Tennessee, the press snapping photos as he covered his face. The town watched in stunned silence as the pillars of their false stability were knocked down, one by one. I stood beneath the willow tree one last time, the wind quiet around me. Justice, long overdue, had arrived. It didn't bring joy. Not really. Too much had been lost. Too many wounds would never fully heal. But it brought truth. And for the first time in decades, Pine Hollow could breathe again. The arrests made headlines. Not just local, but national. Small town, big secrets, one paper called it. Another, Pine Hollow, a case study in controlled silence. The exposure rippled outward. Politicians distanced themselves from Gregory Penwell. The LLCs were dissolved, their assets seized. A chain reaction began that reached boardrooms, campaign offices, even courts. But Pine Hollow wasn't celebrating. People walked slower. Spoke in hushed tones. For decades, the town had lived under a veil of control, not just from fear, but from habit. The order, or what we now understood as the network, had woven itself into everyday life. The town school was funded by Penwell's foundation. The fire station had been built on donated land. Even the local hospital bore the name of one of the arrested financiers. Pulling the rot out hadn't just removed the criminals, it had shaken the town's very sense of identity. And that was what lingered. Not triumph. But disorientation. Daniel left first. The day Julia was discharged, he packed up his car and drove to Chicago. He'd gotten an offer from a news outlet that wanted him to head up a new investigative team. They gave him security. Distance. A fresh start. We hugged goodbye in front of the same general store we used to ride bikes past as kids. You did it, I told him. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We did it. Will you write about it? I asked. I'm thinking about it, he said. But there's so much more I wish we'd never seen. Julia stayed. She didn't return to reporting, at least not right away. Instead, she started working with survivors, people who had been exploited by the network. She helped rebuild the legal cases, sat in depositions, coordinated statements. She was a different person now. Fiercer. Quieter. More determined. One afternoon, she came to my house and handed me a folder. "There's a woman in Charleston," she said. "Runs a center for whistleblowers. They're putting together a book. Testimonies, records, timelines. She wants your story in it." I opened the folder. Inside were the words, "The Hollow Truth." "I don't know," I said. "I never wanted attention." Julia looked at me. "It's not about attention. It's about preservation. So people know how deep this went. And what it cost." What it cost. The phrase stuck with me. I began to list it, quietly, in my journal each night. My grandmother. Dead without ever seeing justice done. My parents, who left town and never returned, too afraid to fight. My childhood. Riddled with questions no one dared answer. Julia's freedom. Traded for truth. Daniel's peace. Shattered by knowledge. And me? I lost the version of myself who thought evil war cloaks enchanted in forests. Evil, I had learned, wore suits. Signed contracts. Hosted barbecues. Smiled in church. But I gained something, too. I gained a purpose. In the months that followed, I stayed in Pine Hollow. Not because I loved it, but because I owed it. I started organizing town hall meetings. Real ones. Not just ceremonial. We invited lawyers, victims, advocates. We created a truth board modeled after the kind used in post-conflict zones. Not to punish, but to give people a place to speak, to grieve, to understand. Slowly, the town began to change. Kids who had been born into silence began to ask questions. Teachers rewrote the local history curriculum. A mural went up on Main Street, paid for not by outsiders, but by residents. It showed a tree, gnarled and twisted, with roots reaching down into chains, and a single flower blooming through its bark. It wasn't beautiful. But it was honest. Then came the trial. Penwell. Caldwell. Dozens of others. It lasted 6 weeks. The courtroom was packed daily. Survivors testified. So did whistleblowers, accountants, even a former deputy who finally admitted to shredding evidence under orders. I sat in the front row every day. And when the verdicts came down guilty, on all counts, I didn't cheer. I closed my eyes. Breathed deeply. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't roar. It whispered, "You were right to fight." After the sentencing, Julia and I went back to the willow tree. It was just a tree now. No secrets buried beneath. No rituals. Just roots and earth and memory. "I used to be scared of this place," I told her. She nodded. "Me too. Now. It feels like the only honest thing that ever stood still." We sat there until dusk. She asked me if I ever wished we hadn't done it. "No," I said. "Never. But I do wish we hadn't needed to." A year passed. Pine Hollow was no longer a headline, but it hadn't slipped into silence either. That silence, the dangerous kind, was gone. In its place was a kind of fragile, noisy honesty. People spoke openly now. Not always kindly, not always comfortably. But truth had cracked the dam, and the waters weren't going back. I found myself becoming something I never expected, a community advocate. I didn't plan it. I just kept showing up. At town hall meetings. School board sessions. Community cleanups. Someone needed to read grant applications for rebuilding the community center. Someone needed to sit with the local paper's new editor and explain why transparency couldn't be optional anymore. That someone became me. They called me Ms. Whitaker, even people my age. Out of respect. Or maybe because they associated me now with Beatrice Whitaker's legacy, my grandmother, whose quiet resistance had laid the first stone in the path that led us here. Julia and I co-founded a non-profit, the Hollow Foundation. Our goal was clear: protect whistleblowers, fund legal aid, document suppressed histories. But what mattered most wasn't what we did on paper. It was the permission we gave others to speak. Survivors who'd once been cast as troublemakers were now mentors. Young people no longer whispered questions, they asked them plainly. One of the first things we did was organize a ceremony. Not a celebration. A reckoning. We read names. Names of those who had vanished, those whose stories were silenced, those who paid for others' secrets. We left a chair empty for each one. At the end, we planted trees each with a small plaque. The last plaque read, "Truth grows roots. Even in hollow ground." I kept the house. I repaired it, slowly. Room by room. The paint was fresh. The porch was sturdy again. The garden bloomed in spring wildflowers, not the manicured roses my grandmother once kept. Every now and then, people stopped by. Kids from the high school looking for interview material. A new town clerk asking if I still had copies of the original court documents. Even the mayor, newly elected, who wanted to know if I'd help write the town's new ethics policy. I didn't say yes right away. I still don't trust politicians. But I did offer him coffee. Daniel visited once, almost exactly a year after he'd left. He was thinner. Paler. But sharper somehow. His eyes had that familiar flicker, always watching, always asking. We sat on the porch, drinking sweet tea. I started writing, he said. The full story. Not for publication. For my daughter. I hadn't known he had one. She was 6. Lived with her mother in Minneapolis. I want her to know, he said. That truth matters. That silence can kill. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That her father tried. He looked at me. Do you think that's true? Yes, I told him. Every word. The nightmares stopped eventually. Not all at once. Not cleanly. But they faded. I no longer flinched when I saw a sheriff's badge. I no longer checked the locks twice before bed. I could hear a phone ring without expecting a threat on the other end. Peace, I learned, is not the absence of memory. It's the presence of meaning. Sometimes I walk to the edge of town. There's a bench near the old trailhead, overlooking the hills. From there, I can see the town sprawl, the library, the church, the new clinic where the mill once stood. It's not perfect. But it's free. And that's everything. Epilogue. Pine Hollow became a symbol not of scandal, but of survival. Universities sent students to study the town's transformation. Journalists cited it in ethics lectures. Federal prosecutors used it to push for stronger protections for rural whistleblowers. But none of that changed the simple truth. This story didn't end with explosions or glory. It ended with people telling the truth. With someone choosing not to be silent. With a girl under a willow tree, years ago, who saw something wrong and years later, finally had the courage to ask, why? And someone answered. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.